First, I'd like to welcome you all to the American University of Beirut, for anybody who's not part of the university, and to the Islam Ferris Center. I'm Ben Hubbard. I'm the Beirut Bureau Chief of the New York Times. I'll be facilitating the conversation today, hopefully not just between me and our distinguished guests, but between all of us here in the room. Our guest today is Qubad Talabani, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Kurdistan Regional Government, a position he's held since 2014. Mr. Talabani took office during an incredibly challenging time for the KRG. This was at a time when the central Iraqi government was not paying the revenues that it should have been paying to the KRG, and when oil prices across the world and in the KRG were on their way down, causing a significant financial crisis. This was also the time when the jihadists of the Islamic State were rampaging, of course, through large parts of Iraq and neighboring Syria, causing tremendous damage to the society and a huge displacement crisis, many of whose victims ended up in the KRG. Mr. Talabani was involved in his role in the government in dealing with these crises and in negotiating sort of how the government would deal with these. And one other note on his background: before serving for the KRG in Erbil, Mr. Talabani was the KRG's representative in the United States for 12 years, which gave him a central role in the economic and political cooperation between the United States and the Kurdistan region. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here today. I want to thank the Islam Ferris Institute for welcoming me. It's great to be here in Lebanon, an amazing country, a country that myself, my family has a deep historical connection to, but a country whose people I see some similarities, not only between Lebanon and Iraq, but also between the Lebanese and Kurdish people. We're very resilient, we're both very stubborn, and I just love the way that the Lebanese are able to go on with life despite all of the challenges that they face. And we as Kurds, we have this too. I don't think we've quite mastered it with the grace that the Lebanese have, but I have a funny story from when I was about to get married. My wife is American, and she was planning our wedding, from the Republican Palace in Baghdad. She was working for the US government at the time. And we were having a destination wedding. Her family's in the US, my family were in Europe or in Kurdistan. So we picked Italy as a halfway place to get married. So we needed a wedding planner. So she found a wedding planner in Italy and is calling her. And in the middle of the conversation, the Republican Palace comes under attack from mortar shells coming in from the insurgency at the time. So she had to quickly duck, and sirens are going off and bombs are crashing all around. And she said to the wedding planner in Italy, "Look, I'm really sorry. I told you I was American, but I'm actually calling you from Baghdad, and those were bombs going off." And the lady said, without missing a beat, she said, "Oh, don't worry, I'm Lebanese. I'm used to that. There's nothing to worry about." And obviously we picked her because that's the kind of mentality that we want to work with, but it fits so well with what we're used to in Kurdistan. But on a serious note, today is the September 11th, and it's a day that, in 2001 changed the world. There's no doubt about that. And initially, when I was invited to talk here, the title of my talk was supposed to be Kurdistan in the post-ISIS world. I wish they'd kept that title, because I would have been able to refute the premise of that title very, very clearly. But it's shocking in 18 years after such a massive attack and after countless wars on terror that we are still talking about terrorism, that there are terrorist groups still trying to take over countries, still trying to take over territories. And too often in the media, in academia, in policy circles, in development circles, I hear the term post-ISIS Iraq, post-ISIS region, almost as if ISIS is gone. That's it. because the Mosul was liberated, there is no ISIS. And I can tell you firsthand that that is not true. ISIS has not gone. ISIS is alive and well, and regrouping, and re-strengthening, and replanning. And to understand this, we have to ask the question, well, who was ISIS? Who is ISIS? Too often we categorize these groups, as in the case of ISIS in Iraq, as this alien foreign group that just came in, rushed in, and took over a big piece of territory, and then was defeated. Right? Coalition came, Iraqis, Iranians, everybody, they came and they defeated ISIS. Well, first of all, ISIS was not a foreign organization to Iraq. ISIS did not come from another country to take over parts of the territory. ISIS is Iraqi. It was born in Iraq. Most of its fighters were Iraqi. Most of its operatives were Iraqi. And yes, there were foreign fighters. Yes, there were Europeans. Yes, there were Americans. Yes, there were Australians. Yes, there were Chinese. Yes, there was a big coalition or consortium of foreign fighters. But the core support that made ISIS do what they did and the way that they did it was from Iraq. Well, where did those people go? They didn't all leave. They were not all captured. They were definitely not all killed. They're still there. Why did ISIS come in and take over a large portion of territory? It's because of poor governance. When Sunni Arabs were demonstrating in 2013, they were not calling for the decapitation of foreigners. They were not calling for the Islamic State. They were not calling for the Caliphate. They were asking for basic services. They wanted water. They wanted healthcare services. They wanted education services. They wanted economic prosperity in the regions. And their warnings and their calls and their requests went unheard. The failure of politics in Iraq, the failure of governance in Iraq, allowed for a group like ISIS to become stronger, to gain support, to wreak the havoc that they did. And now we've liberated these areas from ISIS control. But are these areas any better off than they were before ISIS came? Are they more economically prosperous? Are they more, in terms of infrastructure, are they more developed? Is there greater opportunities for jobs or for progress? Is there a better, more pluralistic political environment? Is there a more tolerant social environment? In any one of these areas where ISIS was dominant? I will tell you no. In fact, these areas may be worse off because of the war, because of destruction, because of the displacement, because of so many factors. These areas are actually much worse off than they were come May of 2014 before the rise of ISIS. So what are we all going to do about this? Are we just going to carry on? Is the Iraqi government just going to carry on business as usual, political bickering, sectarian strife? Or are we actually going to try to address the root cause of the problem, which is a void of governance? Because a government that governs, a government that provides services, a government that provides electricity and water and education and health and jobs and opportunities is more likely to have a slightly happier public. But if this isn't happening, then that society is quickly going to turn again. And ISIS was not the first iteration of a violent terrorist organization in Iraq. Take you back to 2001. We had Jund al-Islam that was formed. Jund al-Islam became Ansar al-Islam. Ansar al-Islam became Ansar al-Sunnah. Ansar al-Sunnah became Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Al-Qaeda in Iraq splintered off and created an Islamic State of Iraq and various other terrorist groups. So this is an evolution. And what worries me is if we do not address the root cause of the problem, then we will have ISIS 3 on our hands, and soon. It's not all gloomy. I'm not completely pessimistic. I think that there is an opportunity. We have a new government, relatively new government in Baghdad, in Iraq, and we have a new government in Kurdistan. We have a prime minister in Baghdad who is an economist, and is a good man, is somebody that we're excited that he's the prime minister. We, as Kurds, I'm talking here, we want to work with him. We think we can work with him. We think he is the kind of person that Iraq needs at this juncture to move the country forward. And at the same time, we in Kurdistan want to fix some of the outstanding issues with Baghdad so we can have more stability and a better partnership and better coordination on dealing with the outstanding issues. And I remember having the pleasure of meeting with Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi very early on in his term, and he asked me, he said, what is the biggest challenge that I face? And I told him it's not security, it's not regional interference, it is not regional conflict, it's not US-Iran tensions, it's definitely not the Arab-Israeli problem, it's governance. If you can govern, and if you can prove to govern, and if you can govern relatively effectively, then you will have addressed your biggest challenge. And I think too often, countries hide behind war, the threat of terrorism, the notion of regional conflict, the realities of regional interference, and they use these factors as an excuse to avoid addressing governance issues. I can't do reform right now, I'm at war. I cannot make this tough decision because I have these neighbors that are meddling in my internal affairs. I can't do this because America's giving me a headache. I can't do this because the Iranians will be upset. There's always an excuse to not do something. And that has not proven to be a valid excuse, because you can make reforms, and not all reforms cost money. You can change legislation, you can change regulations, you can carry out reforms that with just political will, with a bit of courage, with an expectation that, yes, a tough decision may receive some political backlash, but you can ride that storm. This is what we in Kurdistan are trying to do. We are trying to cut through the noise. We're in this part of the world, surrounded by Iran and Turkey, part of Iraq with all of its problems, in Kurdistan with all of our problems. We have been tasked with governing, and our government platform is to provide services, to improve the level of services, to create jobs. And these are not monumental tasks. We're not saying, oh, we're going to turn Kurdistan into the next Dubai. We just want to improve electricity. We want to one day be able to have 24 hours of electricity. We were happy this year because we had, I think, 15, 16 hours of electricity. But there are 24 hours in a day. So that's the next goal, is to improve on that. In this day and age, we still have villages that don't have access to electricity, access to running water. These are challenges that are fixable, but fixes that require a focus on policy, not politics. Because we conflate the two. We combine the two too often. And in our part of the world, people want to participate in elections to rule. I am the ruler. I make decisions. I win elections to pick more ministers than my opposition, to have more DGs in the government than my opposition. not so I can implement my policy to privatize the electricity sector or my policy to improve the healthcare or to create a viable banking sector or to go through the list of what governments should do. So the challenges facing the region as a whole, Iraq more generally, and Kurdistan specifically is one and only is governance. If we can address the governance gap, then we can go a long way to building a society that is going to come to the rescue of the state when there is a crisis, when there is an invasion, when there are terrorists, when there are bad elements trying to destabilize. But if I cannot provide the basic services to the public, and then there's a time of crisis and I call on the people and say, I need your help, once, maybe twice, 3 times, 4 times, but eventually they're going to turn around and say to me, well, you know what? Maybe these others are better than you. And this is what is more prevalent south of us in the rest of the country, but we in Kurdistan can't be complacent. We're proud of our track record. We're proud that Kurdistan is tolerant. We're proud that whenever there's a conflict in the country, Christians, Yazidis, Shabaks, others come to Kurdistan and seek refuge. That's a good sign for us. It means that we have a more tolerant society, that minorities feel more safe in Kurdistan. But at the same time, we have to be realistic that public expectation of us is much greater. We've just come off the back of an elections where we've all given big promises, stability, jobs, services. So now we have to deliver on that. And I can't keep using semi-bogus excuses to not do that. I'm confident that we can address some of our administrative shortfalls. I think Dr. Adel in Baghdad, if he is supported domestically and internationally, can change the direction the country is facing, but it is a monumental task. And I hope that the issue of governance, not just in Kurdistan, not just in Iraq, but in the region as a whole, takes center stage. And that we just go beyond finding somebody else to blame for the shortcomings of our own administrations, be they in a sub-governorate level or a governorate level or a state level or a national level. And that is our challenge. That is the number one challenge. We'll always have security threats. We will always have regional issues. We will always have interesting neighbors. You will always have interesting neighbors. Yeah, you have a C. I wanted to just throw that out there and hopefully giving you a picture of where we were, where we are, where we want to go. We can have a healthy discussion to maybe answer some of your questions and to get more of our points across. I really, really want to thank you all again for having me here and for coming to listening to me speak. It's great to be here, and I look forward to a good discussion.
Great. Okay. Well, I want to definitely come back to the idea of governance. I mean, that's certainly an issue that will resonate very well in Lebanon as well. First, just to sort of continue laying the groundwork for the discussion, walk us through some of the legacies of this ISIS era. I mean, if you're challenging the idea that we are indeed in a post-ISIS era, talk to me about the challenges that continue to face the KRG in terms of the displacement crisis, the humanitarian crisis, security crisis. Sort of what are the legacies of this ISIS period that are still very present in the kinds of challenges that you have to deal with?
I think we have two very determining, I think, legacies. One is the mindset of the security services. Our Peshmerga, our soldiers, did a very valiant job with the coalition support to defend Kurdistan to the best that they can. But this was a wake-up call. We hadn't seen conflict for a long time. So this conflict that took us relatively by surprise, or the speed of the attack, highlighted some of the weaknesses in our own security services. You cannot win wars on bravery alone. The style of combat was very different from what we had been used to facing from the 90s onwards until 2014, we were very good at the counterterrorism side of defending Kurdistan. We have a very strong counterterrorism service. We have very good intelligence services, but this was much more of a traditional combat with barracks, with mechanized units, with infantry units, which our forces were just not ready for. It took a while to regroup, it took a while to restructure, and it sent us a message that, nope, we are not neighbored with Luxembourg or Switzerland, or we will always be living in an area where there is conflict around the corner. So we've got to be, one of the legacy issues is never get complacent again, because I think complacency had crept in. We cannot be complacent. We have to be ready to defend Kurdistan, defend Iraq at all times. The second is a, I think, more complex problem, and that's the social impact of ISIS and the wars, most notably through the forced displacement of residents in Mosul area, in the Nineveh Plains, in Salah ad-Din, in Kirkuk, in Diyala, the ripping up of the fabric of Iraqi society, ripping up Christian families from Yazidi families, Muslim families from Yazidi and Christian families, Shabak families from all of them. Even if there had been an uneasy peace between these communities over the last 100 years, there was peace between them. But what has happened now is that the fabric of the society has been torn apart. Neighbors, again, this goes back to the notion that ISIS was not foreign. The people that went and ransacked the Christian homes in the Nineveh Plains were not Chechens. They were the neighbors. We met with Christian families who told us that their neighbor of 38 years was the person that came into their house and said, the only reason I'm not killing you is because we've shared meals together, but I'm asking you to leave your house and never come back. 38 years to have your neighbor just overnight, no hint that this was coming, no hint that there was this deep-rooted hatred pent up somewhere. How am I going to convince that Christian family to go back to that house? The Yazidis were decimated, not supported, violated, and now they are traumatized. They are a traumatized community within a bigger community that is still suffering from the traumas of Anfal in '88, when Saddam launched the attacks against the Kurds, when Saddam hit us with chemical weapons, when Saddam carried out mass executions. We're still finding mass graves. We found the mass grave just about 3 months ago, where Kurdish bodies were exhumed. So the impact of the trauma of a nation is underestimated. And we live in a society where it's a very male-dominated society. It's very shameful to have psychological issues. Be a man. What does it mean? So what? You've had half of your family annihilated. Get on with it. Move on. It's shameful to cry. It's shameful to be sad. It's shameful to have nightmares. So we're in a society where it's actually taboo to have trauma, but everybody's traumatized. And now there's a new trauma that has not only reignited the old trauma of the Anfal operations, but it has planted more trauma that our society, and in particular the Yazidi community, will have to deal with for the next 30, 40, 50 years. And we just do not have enough psychologists and psychiatrists and social workers to provide psychosocial services to these communities. So these communities are now reintegrating into our society. An 18-year-old Yazidi boy who was for 5 years indoctrinated in an ISIS refugee camp or ISIS military training camp. How do you treat this person? Who treats this person? How can you tell if this person is fine or if this person is one day going to snap and murder his family? I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychiatrist. And there aren't too many that are doing the kinds of screenings that are required. So you talk about the legacy. I think this is one of the most dangerous legacies that we have to live with, because it's I hate to say it, it sounds cheesy, but it's like a ticking time bomb. At any moment, this could explode, this could unravel, and this could have even greater impact on reintegration of displaced communities. And certainly, we are very far away of convincing the displaced communities to go back to where they came from. Not only because of the devastation of their areas, but because of the trauma of what happened to them while they were there.
On governance, I mean, a lot of the things that you said about governance certainly apply to Lebanon. There are definitely parts of Lebanon where you don't have 15 hours of electricity per day. I think one thing both of the societies share is that they do have a lot of resources. They have educated populations, lots of people who, large professional classes. Iraq, you certainly have, certainly in terms of natural resources, much more wealth to count on than the Lebanese have. But why is it so hard? Why do these societies struggle so much to come up with governments that can address these basic services issues? And how do you go about treating those kinds of problems?
Well, one is mismanagement of resources. Iraq is not a poor country. Iraq is a rich country. Its budget this year is $110 billion. It's significantly larger than Lebanon's, than Jordan's. But Iraq has been a welfare state for so long, where it's just hired people, it's just paid people, it's just grown. The public sector has grown so much because it's rich, so you just give people money, just hire people, give people salaries, give people pensions, and keep them quiet. And this has grown and ballooned and ballooned and ballooned over the years. And this includes Kurdistan, by the way. We have a massive civil service workforce, huge, that is not, could be more effective. But so that is part of it. And then there's mismanagement. Yes, there's corruption, and there's just the misappropriation. There's just the wrong use of these funds. And in the case of Iraq, it boggles our minds in Kurdistan, because we're still spending more than we're getting. Right? We're still running a deficit. But I look at Iraq with a $110 billion budget, with a budget execution rate of around 25%. Okay, what about the rest? Where's the rest of it? And if it's not being spent, where is it? How is it being used? And I think that the bureaucracy is so thick, it's so plentiful, that just getting anything through the system is difficult. No doubt there's corruption. No doubt there's misappropriation of funds, and everything is so politicized that there isn't a sensible discussion on improving governance. It's all politicized. He's bad, she's bad. It's more likely he's bad, because there are not many she's in the Iraqi political system, I'm sorry to say. We've done better this year. We have 3 women ministers in our cabinet. We're getting there. We had 1 in the last cabinet. We have 3 now. Hopefully we'll have 6 in the next one. But it is again, it's a debate about politics, not policies. And I have faith in the Prime Minister of Iraq. He's a policy guy. He's interested in the policies. He wants to execute good policies, but he needs an authorizing environment that allows him to execute those policies. And I don't think at this current state he has the authorizing environment or the enabling environment for him to do what he wants to do. And it's our job in the region to try to help him, and we are, which is why we're being flexible in our negotiations with him on some of the outstanding KRG Baghdad issues. But the system as a whole needs to deal with it. At the end of the day, reforms are difficult. Reforms are usually, in the short term, unpopular, and nobody likes to be the person who signs off on an austerity bill. Nobody wants to be the person that cuts subsidies. Nobody wants to be the person that cuts some of the, let's say, misappropriation of funds to this party and that party and this company that belongs to this party and that company that is pro that party. But you have to do it. And if you don't, you fail. So which is more painful? Which of the decisions are more painful? The failure of the state or upsetting this bloc or that bloc? And sometimes I just think, as we were forced to do in the last 4 years, we made some very tough decisions. We cut a lot of expenses. We were forced to cut salaries. We were forced to cut the budget. We slashed about 55% of our government spending. We slashed about 40% of salaries. We slashed 75% of some of the ministerial budgets. These were difficult decisions that we had to make. And yes, there were demonstrations. Yes, there were boycotts of employment. Yes, there were sometimes demonstrations also got violent. But we stuck through it because we had to. If we didn't do it, we would have collapsed. Now that we have a much slightly brighter economic outlook, some of the reforms that we initiated, eliminating ghost employees, trying to reduce the bureaucracy, trying to have greater controls over public spending in Kurdistan, are starting to bear fruit. And people will start to see that, oh, okay, this decision wasn't just done to annoy people. This decision was done to, they had to do it, we had to do it, and now we're starting to see a bit more efficiency, a bit more effectiveness. And I think that's, success breeds success, and we just need a few success stories to be able to tell our public. And I think we can be a good model for the rest of the country. I think some of the things that we've done in terms of tax, in terms of customs, in terms of biometric registration of civil servants, of all employees, where we've eliminated ghost employees, we're reprogramming all government services, we're going towards providing digital services to citizens, making processes more transparent, making processes shorter. These are all things that we can point to that have daily impacts on citizens, that the rest of the country can say, okay, if these Kurds can do it, I'm sure we can do it too.
I can continue asking questions whenever anybody else will. We do want to make this a conversation with the room, so if anyone who has a question, feel free to put your hand up and jump in. Your situation is more complicated than for other, sort of federal governments, because you have this very complicated relationship with Baghdad, obviously. So walk us through that. I mean, how does that complicate the situation? Does it perhaps provide any benefits, or is it just an extra complication? I mean, after the Kirkuk referendum and after after sort of the various finance issues that we've had, just lay out for us the picture of how it looks now with the new government in Baghdad.
I think, one of the big issues we have is this concept of federalism. It's misunderstood. We look at it a certain way. Some in the federal government look at it another way. I don't think that we've been able to fully kind of cement federalism as an administrative system in Iraq. The Iraqi, and it's ironic because the Shia, before they came into power, were fully supportive of decentralization. They were pushing for the 6 provinces in the south to have their own federal region, with similar powers to the Kurdistan region. They were very, very proactive on this. The Sunnis, the traditional nationalists, were very against decentralization. They were for a strong central government. And now that the Shia parties are in power in Baghdad, they're not as keen to decentralize as they used to be. They don't talk about federalism in the way that they used to. And the Sunnis are now talking about confederations, not even federalism. They're saying, no, this federalism is not working. We need confederations in Iraq. And it takes me back to a conversation my late father had with a senior Sunni politician who was vice president at the time. I don't want to mention his name, but any one of you that follows Iraq can figure out who it was. He said to him, so-and-so, why do you cling so strongly to a strong central government when you know that you'll never go back to that strong central government? He said, Jalal, you're right. He said, but my heart is telling me that we have to stick to a strong center, even though my brain is telling me federalism is the way forward. Now, federalism, if you look at this, not from the point of the ruler, okay? If we have governors and administrators in Iraq, not rulers. If you have a ruler, you don't want to give power away, you want to rule. And rule from the center, and rule with authority, and rule with power. But if you're an administrator, you're a manager, you're a governor, you want to devolve authority. You want to be good managers, devolve authority. Good managers don't micromanage. Very few top executives are micromanagers. You know, maybe there's the odd, Elon Musk somewhere, but most people are better when they devolve authority, when they give responsibility down, and in Iraq it's the same. Right now, Baghdad's the prize. So everybody's going to fight over it. Everyone's going to fight over the ministries. But you make Basra strong. You give Basra authority. Basrawis, they want authority. They're sick of the current situation they're in. They finance Iraq. They fund Iraq. But they don't have electricity. They don't have clean water. They have poor governance. They have poor services. They see the money leave them on a daily basis. So they're saying, look, if we need this too. We want our share of the revenues. Other areas also that are resource rich. Now, you can't just take the resource rich areas and make them richer, and the areas that don't have resources, make them poorer. No, this is what decentralization can do. Revenue sharing, devolve authority, then the ministers in Baghdad can become regulators. They can become the watchdogs. They can make sure that the general policies of the parties and of the government are being adhered to. This is not something that only applies to Iraq. Kurdistan is very centralized, and we need to decentralize as well. We have 4 provinces in the Kurdistan region. We also need to devolve power to the provinces. It's part of our agenda. It's part of our mandate for this administration. And that's the. So there is an unclear understanding of federalism. We have a constitution. It's great, very nicely written, but too often it's treated like a restaurant menu. Right? I like these 5 articles, so I only talk about these 5 articles because these are the 5 articles that I fought for, that I got put in, that serve my country's interests or my nation's interests or my people's interest. Somebody else will just say, no, this part of the Constitution says this. So if you look at the Constitution as a whole, it's a good document. It's not perfect, but it's a good document, and it covers a lot of the basic principles, but it needs to be the guiding principle of the country, and it's not right now.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you so much for being here. I'm a visiting student from Stanford University, and I'm really curious to know more about the ongoing UN special investigation on the sex crimes for the Yazidi population. I know that a UK barrister has been appointed to lead it, Karim Assad Khan, and I'm curious to know what role the Kurdish government is playing and how you're going to help facilitate the collection of evidence, which is typically a very sensitive process because it involves victims of sexual violence and rape. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. We're cooperating very well with Karim Khan. He visits us regularly. There are several components to this. There is as you said, the collection of evidence, which there is ample evidence that has been collected, evidence that has been, I think, collected in a scientific way as well, because we've lived through the Saddam trials. We've learned from the mistakes that were made from the Saddam trials, and especially on how evidence is handled. And if you want evidence to be used in whether it's a domestic or international court, then it needs to be handled in a proper way. So we've received training. We've actually given some training as well on this process. I don't feel that there is a problem on the evidence collection side of it. I think where it gets more complicated is the sovereignty issues, in terms of which court, which country. There is a different talk. Some people want this in the International Criminal Court. Others want this to be an Iraqi process. Others want it to be an Iraqi process with international oversight. There are very many different options. I advocate that we learn from the Iraqi tribunals, that we do make them more international, give them greater objectivity. There's no doubt that crimes were committed. There's no doubt that there was a genocide against the Yazidis. There's no doubt that there was foreign and domestic involvement. There is no doubt in some of the actors that will hopefully be brought to justice. But I would much rather these people be brought to justice in an international setting or with some sort of international oversight, even if it's done domestically, to give it the objectivity that also sends a message to future perpetrators. There was a lot of money that came in from a lot of countries to a group like ISIS. If you start following the money and you start prosecuting individuals who finance this organization, whether they live in this country or that country, and it's done by an international body that is serious about going after this, people are going to think twice. It's going to be a major deterrent to future crimes. There's nothing, unfortunately, you can do about this crime. The crime happened, the trauma is there, and no criminal proceedings is going to bring closure to the people that have been devastated or the people that are still under captivity. We still have thousands of women that are under captivity, that are being treated as slaves in Iraq, some of them, by Iraqi households, some of them. Others, yes, are in maybe Syria or some places even in the Gulf. But there's still many in Iraq. They're being trafficked. So we're supporting the process. We believe in the process, and I think that, again, we can learn from the Saddam trials, which were hastily done with pride and nationalism and sovereignty as the core. But really, we could have made a Nuremberg trial out of the Saddam trial. There was enough documentation for historians for hundreds of years to study what happened, to study the Anfal, to study the effects of the Anfal, to study how meticulous the Ba'ath regime were in their oppression against the Kurds, how meticulous they were. They documented everything, very much like the Nazis did. But we missed this opportunity because it was done in a kind of, domestic way. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. Welcome to Lebanon. I'm Jad Shahrour, the Communication Officer of the Sami Qassi Foundation. You were talking about governance, you were about political and economical reforms, cutting budgets, and I Googled you, I read some articles, and you visited Tallinn. So I want to know more about your e-governance process. Are you looking forward to implement e-governance in your region? And what's the challenges in going through this process?
Thank you. Yes, you did your research well. I was in Tallinn in Estonia, which is one of the leading countries in the world for e-governance, and they have a very strong e-governance academy that provides services all around the world. When we started with the human resource reform, with the biometric registration and the ghost employees, we just looked at the system. Think of the society. We're providing not enough electricity, water is not at the right level, people are not getting paid. So our population is automatically angry. Right? They're upset with the government. Then they have to renew their driver's license. So somebody that's already disgruntled goes into the driver's license office and has to go through 17 steps to renew a driver, not to get one issued for the first time, just to renew. 17 steps. Go to this window and provide your documentation. Go to the next window and get them stapled. Go to the next window and have them put into a folder. Go to the next window and give the folder to this person. When you give the folder to that person, they look at it and they say, oh, no, they've made a mistake here. You need to go back to window 1. You need this paper added to it as well. And they go back to window 1. And then this process is like snakes and ladders. Right? You almost get to the final step where you get to meet the director that just is about to sign everything. And the person says, oh, this is wrong. This is the old form. You needed to fill out the new form. It was issued yesterday. Go back to square one. How does that citizen feel when they go through this process? They come out even more angry.
Especially if it's like Lebanon, when many other people that started the process had wasta and they knew somebody and they called their cousin and, you know.
Yes,
So you have other
yes,
people who
there
are
is
jumping into you and
wasta,
finding
there
this
is,
way, you know.
but, so we thought, all right, we don't have money as a government, we're in a deficit, we can't build fancy buildings like we used to do in 2009, 10, 11, 12, those good days are gone for now, they'll return. So what can we do? What could the ministers do? They can't just sit there and not do anything because they don't have ribbons to cut and foundation stone to lay and do fancy ceremonies for projects. So we called the ministers in and we said, okay, do your jobs better. Provide services better, faster, more transparent. So we launched the services program here in Kurdistan, where we basically process mapped every service that the government delivers to the public. So there was about 620 services in total. About 200 of them are general services, but about 413 of them are individual transactions between the government and the citizen. We process mapped every single one of them, and we found out that some of them are just, they're diabolical. Some steps require 106 signatures. 25 departments from 12 ministries. I won't say, it's so ludicrous, the service is so ludicrous, I'm shameful to say it. So we can't continue like this. This is easy to change. So we launched the services initiative, which is to basically process map the services as is. Put them into a web portal as is. If anyone's interested, services.gov.krd. That is it, the portal. It's in Kurdish for now, but we'll be doing English and Arabic later. The next step is to shorten the processes, make them happen in less time, make them happen in less number of steps, make them happen in a more transparent way. Because if somebody knows that it takes 3 steps to get something done and it costs 25,000 dinars to get something done, if suddenly they have to take 5 steps and they have to pay 75,000 dinars to get it done, a red flag is going to pop up and say, hang on a minute, your government guideline doesn't say this. But what many countries do is they tend to digitize their existing systems. And for us, this will be insane. So we are not rushing to digitize the current system. We want to reduce the bureaucracy, reduce the number of steps that we currently do things manually, then digitize. And that's the kind of things that we're trying to learn from countries that have gone through this, because it is not the silver bullet that's going to fix everything, but if it just makes that citizen feel a little less angry, makes that citizen feel that their government actually is helping them, that the person who's sitting behind the window is making this process easier for them, then it goes a long way to building that trust with that citizen, because at the end of the day, this is what governments should do. We provide services. And in this day and age where everybody has a smartphone, a lot of people have tablets, a lot of people are online, digitizing will make things easier. Digitizing will make things faster. Digitizing will make things more transparent. But at the same time, we cannot completely digitize because we understand we still have a rural society. And we still have people that may not be digitally aware. But just making the steps easier is the first step, then to digitize. That is our policy. This is what we are focusing on and moving full speed ahead on. And we have some tests that have proven to be good, some others that have proven to that needed to be readdressed.
صباح ياسين تلفزيون العراقية. حقول بالعربي مضطرة يعني. أول سؤال عندي 3 أسئلة. كيف واجه إقليم كردستان ضعف التنسيق مع الحكومة المركزية إبان سيطرة داعش؟ السؤال الثاني، هل استلم الإقليم مرتبات الموظفين يلي كانت متأخرة رغم أنه هلأ الوزير الحالي وزير المال العراقي كردي؟ ثالث سؤال، متى سيتم حسم الملفات العالقة بين بغداد وأربيل وأبرز المناطق المتنازع عليها؟
Thank you. I'll respond in English.
Let me translate the English for the room. How did the Kurdistan regional government face the miscommunication between the central government, especially when Daesh took over part of Kurdistan? Did KRG actually get the back pay for the salaries of your employees from the central government, given that the current Minister of Finance is Kurdish, and when will the pending files, particularly between Erbil and Baghdad, be resolved, particularly over the disputed areas?
I wish I had the answers to these three very important questions, because if I did and they were positive, then we'd have very few problems left in the country. We are in negotiations. We have very good dialogue right now with the government. We've broken the issues up into two main portfolios: budget and oil on one side, security and disputed territories on the other side. We have two teams that are constantly going to Baghdad and from Baghdad coming to Kurdistan, debating, discussing these issues, negotiating these issues. The atmosphere, touch wood, is much better. The level of understanding of each other's issues and obstacles is, touch wood, much better. There is a genuine, I sense, a genuine interest in reaching a deal. Now that is the positive side. The more realistic side is these deals are complicated, and they haven't not been solved for, because they're easy. They're complicated, and I just think that if everybody needs time, the Prime Minister needs time, we need time. We need to be creative about these issues, and I'm currently optimistic given the quality of the discussions that we're having. But we have to cut through the noise, right? Because we have parliaments on both sides that create noise. They have parliaments that want to call in this minister and say, you're being too flexible to the Kurds, or the Kurds are saying you're being too flexible to Baghdad. And there are people who thrive in conflict. There are people who need conflict, political conflict, to be relevant. There are people and politicians who need the gaps so they can come on TV and grandstand and say, well, if I were Prime Minister, I would do it this way. I would crush the Kurds, or I would, do. We've got to get beyond the muzayad, the kind of the grandstanding, and just talk about numbers, talk about facts, talk about the Constitution, talk about the laws. I think what happened with one of the things that ISIS. Look, a lot of times we talk about ISIS. ISIS didn't fill a security vacuum in the country. There was not a security vacuum. There were enough people with weapons in the country to have been able to deal with ISIS. There are enough weapons in the country now to be able to deal with the threat of terrorism. ISIS filled a political vacuum in the country. And unless that political vacuum gets filled with one that is effective, is governing effectively, we're going to have the same issues re-emerge, and then Baghdad can blame KRG, and KRG can blame Baghdad. We can all blame each other, but that's irrelevant at the end of the day, when the reality is there is a group that is benefiting from the gaps within the system. I think security cooperation is a must. There is some dialogue. There is some, I wouldn't call it, cooperation might be a bit too rosy. There's talks, but these talks need to turn into cooperation. They need to turn into operational cooperation, where we share information against people that want to do the country harm, that want to do Kurdistan harm. We have expressed our willingness. On the Iraqi side, they've expressed their willingness. It just sometimes things just move slowly, sometimes. Regarding the Backpay, no, we haven't received Backpay, and I think sometimes there is, the Iraqi government is paying some money to Kurdistan. They're paying a portion of the salaries of the citizens of Kurdistan, but they're not paying the entirety of the salaries of the people of Kurdistan. And Kurdistan is in debt today. We have a large debt, about $24 billion in debt. The question is, why are we in debt? Right? Was it just because we were wasteful? We just spent much more. We spent 24 billion more than we should have done. No, the reason we're in debt is because in 2014 Baghdad cut the budget of the Kurdistan region, and that cutting of the budget forced us to accelerate our oil exports, forced us to accelerate our oil sales, And let's just do a very basic calculation. Get the Iraqi budget laws from 2014 until today and see what Kurdistan's entitled to. Forget that we have oil and we sell oil. 2014 until today, do the calculation. Kurdistan was entitled to $44 billion in that time frame. Calculate the oil revenues of Kurdistan's oil exports in that time frame, and we see that Kurdistan has received about $20 billion worth of oil revenues in that time frame. And the gap is the debt. It's what Iraq didn't pay us, which forced us into debt. Now, I would like Iraq to cut us a check for $24 billion and call it quits, and we'll give them all of the oil, and they can sell it and live happily ever after. I know that's not going to happen. I'd like it to, because that's what should happen, because that's what the budget law said should happen. But I think too often there is a misconception that, oh, Baghdad pays Kurdistan, and Kurdistan just mismanages its money, and they don't give the oil, and they doesn't get to the citizens. The reality is, Baghdad pays a bit. Even now, with the 2019 budget law, which is a good budget law, they're not paying the entirety of what we're entitled to. We get about 400 million, maybe just under $400 million a month. We're entitled to much more per the budget law. So we have to supplement that extra with our own sales. So forget politics, take the politics out of it. It's numbers. And there are enough numbers. If you look at the budget law, there's enough there to make everybody feel part of this country. There are enough line items in the budget law in terms of sovereign expenditures, which is a very general and vague definition. Oil companies operating in the south of Iraq get paid out of sovereign expenditures. Oil companies in Kurdistan that are contributing to national export, don't get paid out of sovereign expenditures. We have to pay this out of our budget. Why? The Iraqi army gets paid out of sovereign expenditures. The Kurdistan Peshmerga, who fought with the Iraqi army against ISIS, does not get paid out of sovereign expenditures. There are so many instances like this that is creating an unfair balance, that too often people zoom in on one component of this. Oh, the Kurds are not complying. Well, there's a reason that we're not complying, because if we complied, then we would be back into a massive deficit, and the budget law is not being implemented. We have told our brothers in the federal government, give us our entitlement per the budget law, and we'll give you the oil. It's not, for us, it doesn't matter if we sell it, if we produce it. It's the process as a whole that is important. And I feel, again, I'm not getting overexcited. I feel that there is a better understanding of where each side is. The debt is an interesting one. Iraq is $100 billion in debt. Kurdistan contributes to Iraqi debt, because the debt gets paid out of sovereign expenditures. 17% of sovereign expenditures is ours. So when Iraq pays, I think, $43 billion back to Kuwait as part of the Kuwait Compensation Fund, Kurdistan has contributed, paid Kurdistan money to the Kuwait Compensation Fund. Oh, we didn't invade Kuwait. Kurdistan was devastated in the Anfal. 4,000 villages destroyed, 182,000 people killed and missing, chemical and biological weapons used in over 250 instances. Where's the compensation for that? Okay, so we have been poor at communicating to the Arab street in Iraq. That's not the central government's fault. It's our fault. We have not communicated these issues in a way that has generated support for our position. We are just deemed as these stubborn Kurds that want our cake and eat it. No, I think hopefully we'll have a healthier dialogue. I hope I answered your questions.
Yes.
Thank you. Sami Haddad. You explained very eloquently that ISIS is indigenous to Iraq. But ISIS obviously did get a lot of non-Iraqi fighters and got a lot of other military and other help. It is my understanding that a lot of this help, including these foreign fighters, transited through Turkey. Turkey is a NATO democracy. The question is it correct that Turkey allowed or encouraged, or what did Turkey do? And since ISIS is still present, and you said strong and dangerous, is the Turkish regime playing any role, positive or negative? Thank you.
You know, people came from all over the world to fight for ISIS, be it in Syria, be it in Iraq, be it in other countries where ISIS have carried out operations. We would like all countries to do more to combat them. And I think now that the ISIS is seen as much more of a global threat than maybe in 2014. It may have been seen as merely just an isolated threat in an area. But now the fact that it's a global threat, I expect countries to be much more vigilant in dealing with the threat, dealing with the communication, dealing with finance, dealing with the treatment of wounded ISIS fighters. And I think that if anybody thinks that ISIS is an organization that could be played with, that could be used potentially to destabilize this country or that country, they'll quickly realize that it'll come back to bite them very, very quickly and quite painfully.
What about Turkey?
If any country thinks that, then there'll be.
Point taken. Yes, back here. Yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Oba Ali. I just would like to ask you about ISIS, because at the beginning you said ISIS is still alive and they are still fueling themselves. And regarding all of that, what are this part of the world leaders and their policy makers, what are they doing to prevent the youth of this part of the world to join ISIS? What are they doing? Like, are they doing any actions? Do you guys have meetings to come up other ways that you can encourage the youth to not join ISIS? Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant question. I think what worries me about the world and the international community is short-term memory disorder. Right? ISIS is the problem of this day, and then suddenly Mosul is liberated and the world shifts to the next problem. Is it North Korea? Is it Iran? There's a shift, and suddenly it's off the front pages of the newspapers. New York Times doesn't write about it as often as they used to. It doesn't make the headline news. We had an ISIS attack in Kurdistan just a month ago. An ISIS attack. They came into Kurdistan and tried to attack a base. 4 brave security service members were killed. Nobody talked about it. And tomorrow there'll be another one, and another one, and another one. And so when the international attention is off, then also governments tend to move on to the next topic. They move on to the next issue of the day, and then that the resources and the time and the energy and the personnel that they had assigned for the anti-ISIS coalition that used to meet every week in different capitals and formulating strategies, automatically it just begins to dissipate. And then ISIS can just sit back, and then in a few months, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, can rear its head again in a more dangerous and more violent way. And again, how can you stop them? Well, There are several ways we can stop them. Stop them at the source, at the countries of origin where they come from. Extremism is expanding from London to the rest of the world, Canada, the US, Australia, let alone the Arab world, Europe. You don't necessarily have governance issues in many of those capitals. But what ISIS were able to do this in a way that even Al-Qaeda wasn't able to do was create an aura of invincibility, an aura that this is the one, an aura that they are the dynamic. They were using these high-tech 4K videos. They were doing these really high-end production clips and advertisements that showed power and showed authority. And you couldn't stop that. But that element of the foreign fighters was not the most devastating element of this. What made ISIS strong was the grassroots that they had, the foot soldiers on the ground. This added the stardust to ISIS. Jihadi John made it a big issue in the UK. The guys in Australia made it, they internationalized it. They added the gloss to an organization. But the guys that were doing the most horrible stuff were the foot soldiers on the ground. And that's where you need to cement the cracks and not allow that to generate, to be able to attract the kind of recruits that they were able to recruit. Now we have a horribly complex problem where families of ISIS fighters are in limbo. Do they go back? Do they not? Do they stay in refugee camps? Do they get accepted back into their host countries? Are they safe to be able to be expected? You talk about legacies in one of your questions. You talk about what are the legacies of this. This is another legacy of it. The young British girl that got swept up with it all now wants to go back to England and say, well, I did wrong. And how do you deal with that? It's very complicated. I don't have the answer for that.
Let me follow up. You made a very interesting point about how these, when ISIS is a massive threat and they're carrying out catastrophic bombings and beheading people on television, then the whole world gets interested. And I'm curious, I'm not personally a big fan of the term the international community just because I think it's a bit too vague. Yeah. But let me ask about sort of the international role in the things that you're talking about being important now. Sort of, Iraq is not in an immediate crisis in terms of ISIS running territory and carrying out catastrophic operations, but needs to get back, in the argument that you've made very eloquently, that Iraq needs to take this time to really focus on services issues and on governance to sort of fill that void. What role do you see in Iraq and the KRG's international partners playing in that? I mean, on one hand, you seem to be saying that these governments themselves need to do a better job. And so I'm curious sort of what role you see their international partners, be they the United States or other members of the coalition, in helping them deal with some of those challenges.
I think there's a lot that they can play, but Iraq has to want it. Right? We in Kurdistan want foreign assistance, not just money, technical expertise. I would love a senior World Bank economist sit in my office and tell me what's wrong with my economy. I'd like that, right? I would love it if I had, and we're working on this, Dutch agricultural experts to come in with our Ministry of Agriculture and develop a real agro-industry sector. Help us, think it through. We don't know. In our part of the world, it's almost shameful to not know something. You have to be an expert on everything. I have to be an expert on agriculture. I have to be an expert on economy. I have to be an expert on banking. I have to be an expert on security. I have to be an expert on everything. If I'm not an expert, then I'm a failure. But the reality is, we're not experts on everything. And if we were, then we wouldn't be in the crappy situation that we're in. So we need expertise, and there's lots of it. There is lots of expertise in international development organizations, in the World Bank, through the IMF, through consultants. So that's, I think, and we're benefiting. In Kurdistan, we are not shy to say we don't know. We are not shy to say we need your help. And we are not shy to tell foreign development organizations that $1 or €1 spent in Kurdistan goes a lot further than it does in Baghdad. We pride ourselves on it. And we think that, rather than in 2003, 4, and 5, when the US was spending billions and billions of dollars in the reconstruction of Iraq, trying to fix electricity in Ramadi was difficult then. There was a full-blown raging insurgency going on. So any dollar that you spend there is not going to work. So we used to tell them, spend money where you can. Show success stories where you can. And if that means coming to Kurdistan, do it. Because then you can point to it and say, you know what? These Kurds, they were able to do it, you can do it too. But there's been such hesitancy in the past to do something in Kurdistan for fear of upsetting the federal government, because if anyone does anything in Kurdistan, then obviously they're supporting the independence of a Kurdish state. And that's not true. You can do more in Kurdistan because there is a better enabling environment, there's a more authorizing environment, there is more stability and security, and there's a willing partner in the government that actually believes in reform and wants to carry out reform. So, and I think diplomatic, let's say, postings are now understanding this. So we're working with many, many different countries on different areas, trying to create a coordination between different agencies and organizations to find out, okay, the Dutch are good in agriculture, help us on agriculture. And other countries are helping us on other services. So we're doing that because we're not too proud. I always say, and I think this is public, so this is going to get me in trouble, but I'm going to say it anyway. At the Iraq conference to raise money for the reconstruction of Mosul, and for the various different donor conferences that have happened over the last 10 years, you've had Iraqi ministers and senior Iraqi officials that go before a donor audience and tell them how great Iraq is. Iraq is a great country, Azim. It is the land between two rivers, the cradle of civilization, land with plentiful natural resources and great human resources. We invented astrology. We invented mathematics. We are great. This is a donor conference. So if you say that to a group of people that you want them to pay you money, they'll turn around and say to you, well done, I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy you're that great. I'm going to help Jordan because I have the king of Jordan on the phone to me every day telling me that he's on the brink of collapse, and if you don't give him money, it's going to get overrun by all of the challenges that he has, and Al-Qaeda is about to take over the country, and if you don't send new military units in, and new helicopters and development assistance, that Jordan's going to fail, and everybody panics, and quickly, well done, Jordan. Well done. That's how you behave at a donor conference. You take a punch of your pride, right, and say, I need help. But Iraq goes to these conferences and says, oh, we're great. No, we're great. The Iraqi technology, the transportation minister talked about space travel 3,000 years ago. For goodness sake. We sent people to space. No, you didn't.
Well, at least they don't fly in their private jets after Superman.
They do that as well.
Question here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. My name is Saya. I'm a master student of Wageningen University in the Netherlands, so we work a lot on agriculture with you. I have a completely different question, actually. I think the title of this discussion is Challenging Facing Kurdistan, the Kurdistan region. And in 2017, of course, there has been a referendum going on in Iraqi Kurdistan. Of course, this referendum has been quite disputed. We all know about it. But what I find interesting is that Iraqi Kurdistan is, in that way, kind of advocating for a model, nation-state model that actually has been a model for their own oppression towards the Kurds. And what you have been saying in the beginning is that Kurdistan is beautiful in the way that it's now home to many different ethnic groups. It has always been like that. The Yazidis, we see Assyrians, we see increasing numbers of Arabs, and we have the Kurds, of course. So the referendum, of course, has increased the challenges of Kurdistan. I think we can admit that as well. So how can we make sure that the Kurdistan region actually also takes into account those new minority groups in the region and advocates for the same rights for them as well? And also, I'm wondering, like, because you stressed a lot that we have to stress on governance. That's the basic to create reform. We have to stress on the providing like basic services to the citizens. This also means the new citizens of Kurdistan. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Our population grew by almost 30% overnight because of the conflict with ISIS. We had 1.5 million internally displaced people, about 260, 270,000 Syrian refugees that had already been there. And a very small percentage of these people were in refugee camps. A lot of them assimilated and integrated into the towns and the villages of Kurdistan. Now, can you just imagine you're here in Beirut, you already have, I think, a lot of refugees here, but you just imagine a 30% increase of your population overnight. We're 5 million people, and a 30% increase overnight. Kids we have 181,000 internally displaced kids in our schools, 181,000. They're using 520 schools. Now, we're proud of this. I mean, there was a point where we were getting all these visitors coming, all these high-profile celebrities coming and telling us, thank you, well done, we're proud of you. And we would, obviously, it's nice to be thanked. It's very nice to have global celebrity come and tell you, well done, and then they leave. And we're looking around saying, that was nice. Then what? And then the next global celebrity comes through and goes to a refugee camp and taps a few children on the heads and takes some pictures, happy kids in camps, and then they leave. And on the way out, they go give a press conference and they say, these Kurds are brilliant, amazing people. Amazing government. They just help these poor people. They did, and then they leave. And we're like, yeah, okay, great. We're getting recognition, which is great. I appreciate recognition. But it costs the KRG about $1.4 billion a year to provide services to the displaced. 1.4 billion that we don't have, but we do it. Because they're getting electricity services, they're getting education services, they're getting water services, they're getting security services. And people always look at displaced communities as problem communities. But we've had very few criminal, let's say, events as a result of the displaced community. We've had very, low increase in crime. There's been no acts of terrorism, touch wood, from the displaced community so far. They've been as wonderful as they can be. But that is not sustainable for us to continue these services without support. The Iraqi government gives us no support to provide for these services. Yes, they pay for the teachers who teach the Arab curriculum or the Iraqi curriculum to the displaced students, but they don't pay for the care staff, they don't pay for the support staff, they don't pay for the electricity bills of the schools, they don't pay for the running costs of the schools, which adds up. The healthcare bills for the displaced. So it's a 1.4 billion bill that we're left with. UNHCR says, well, we are UNHCR. R is refugee. These are internally displaced people, so I can't really do anything about them because technically it's their country. I mean, it's such an illogical point that it frustrates us beyond belief. Now, this is where Iraq at a donor conference could be hollering. Now, of course, we don't get invited to these donor conferences because we're Kurds, or when we get invited, we have to sit in the 5th row in the back and nobody's allowed to speak. So we look at this and say, well, you know, Germany recently put aside, I don't know how many $1 billion for stabilization of Iraq. Great, good on them, well done, thank you for Germany. Fix a school in Mosul, fix a well, you know, integrate societies in newly liberated areas. But we've provided electricity for 1.5 million people, new people, which is draining our system. It's hurting our grid. It's hurting the capacity. It's using up fuel. Is any of this reconstruction and so-called stabilization funds coming? Just don't give it to me. Don't give it to the Kurdistan, because everyone spend it themselves on the services that need to be spent, because that contributes to stabilization. There's no good stabilizing an unstable area and destabilizing a stable area. So I think that we've provided a lot of services, and we're not, you know, we're proud of what we've done for the refugees, because Kurds have been refugees. We know what it's like to be refugees. And people were very gracious with their homes and with the society, and they continue to be. But I just think that sometimes we become a victim of our own relative success, because they say, oh no, they're doing okay. These guys are doing okay. Let's go somewhere that's not doing okay. Now, that's going to come under scrutiny in the next few years, because as so-called liberated areas get attempted to get reconstructed, what happens to these people? Do they really want to go back to the displaced community who are in Shaklawa, a beautiful town on the outskirts of Erbil, green, mountainous, nice, bustling economy, nice restaurants, nice hotels? Do they really want to leave there and go back to some part of the southern areas of Nineveh? I don't see it happening. So I think this community is here to stay for the foreseeable future, and they're welcome to, but that's a burden on us, that we need help to better manage them. And I think, again, the world has shifted. The international organizations have moved on. Even the UN's money is now being reapportioned to other problems around the world. And I can see us like waving, hello, hi, we're still here, don't go. And that's just the reality that we have to live with, I'm afraid.
I think this will be the last question. Go ahead. Yeah,
Thank you. So I'm an Assyrian from Iraq, and I've been living there for 10 years now. But what you said, that they're getting funds from the government, I don't think it's true, because we're getting funds from the church in order to get the place to live in, the apartment, the states of the electricity. They're all getting paid by the church. So where is the government in this? Because they're getting their funds from the UN and other organizations. There is no mention of the government whatsoever there. And also, what parts are they, what is the government doing that will ensure that the minorities are going to stay and not leave? Because living in Shaklawa with the nice place, etc., it's not enough. We want to go back to our land. We love our land. We've been there for billions of years. And yeah, basically that's it. What are the steps that the government wants to take in order to ensure that they don't leave, since their number has declined so much since 2009? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I do want to clarify, and I hope I didn't misrepresent my points, but we as the government are not paying refugees and IDPs out of pocket into pocket, but we provide services that are a cost to our government. So when we generate electricity and homes are getting electricity, that costs us as the government, because we have to pay for the fuel to generate that electricity. We have to pay for the technicians that help transmit that electricity. The doctors and the hospitals and the healthcare professionals are paid by our government to provide these services to the host community, but also to the guest community, the police and the security services that are patrolling the streets and protecting, whether it's the camps or whether it's the neighborhoods. Again, so these are costs that are being incurred by the government. I didn't say that we're giving handouts to the displaced community. The Iraqi Ministry of Migration did that disastrously. Most of the money ended up going to ISIS, not to the displaced people. For us, we have seen how the refugee and IDP community has actually been a contributing factor to our economy. They are skilled, they are hardworking. You go to many of the restaurants and you will see members of the displaced community working in those restaurants, in the hotels, engineers, on construction sites, in all kinds of different walks of life. You will see people working, earning a living, and benefiting from the opportunities, little or a lot, that may be available in the Kurdistan region. It is our job to create a better environment, to create more economic opportunities, to create a more vibrant private sector for people to flourish in. And in that instance, I think that there are many in the displaced community that can also benefit from that area. I would like to see a day where the displaced community go back to their home villages, not because I don't want them in the Kurdistan region, but because I want them to show the ultimate challenge to ISIS and to the perpetrators of the genocides, to say, you didn't win. I'm back home. I'm home now. But going home has challenges, has security challenges, has administrative challenges, has services, lack of services, so that there isn't a willingness or there isn't an excitement yet to go back, because you look at the current landscape of the Nineveh Plains, you look at the current landscape of Sinjar and the surrounding predominantly Yazidi areas, you look at the landscape of some of the areas in Diyala, and there's been a demographic shift in the population. And people who were probably supportive of ISIS are back there, and people who ran from ISIS are in the Kurdistan region. So I see this taking a long time for this population to go back. But while they're in Kurdistan, Kurdistan is their home. And that's how we've always behaved, despite sometimes our faults. But the doors have always been open, and for the foreseeable future, they will continue to be open. This guy was asking about in the green plaid shirt. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I'm a journalist at L'Orient Le Jour newspaper. I have two questions, if I may. In 2017, after the referendum in the KRG, the Baghdad government retook the city of Kirkuk from the Peshmergas. There has been divisions between the Peshmergas, between the PDK and UPK. How do you explain this division? And I have a second question. What is the relationship between the KRG and the Islamic Republic of Iran? Thank you.
Two good and strategic and loaded questions. Can I say it's my fault because I said give it to him. So I asked for it. No, good questions. Good questions. The first one is complicated. Obviously, there are divisions. There are different political, we're two major political parties that have had different beliefs since the 60s until today. But Kirkuk is an issue that should unite the Kurds, is an issue that is bigger than party politics. And in the last few months, we've come together with a joint candidate for the new governor of Kirkuk. We are lobbying the Arab community and the Turkmen community together to be able to recreate an administrative structure in Kirkuk that serves all Kirkukis. And we have to, as Kurds, we have to look at Kirkuk as a multi-ethnic city. Yes, for us, it's always part of Kurdistan. We'll always see it as part of Kurdistan, but we don't say only the Kurds must live there. There are indigenous Arabs, there are indigenous Turkmens, there are indigenous Assyrians, there are indigenous other communities that are there and they're indigenous to that area, but there are also other people that were brought into those areas by Saddam's regime to ethnically cleanse and change the demographics of that area. The Constitution of Iraq has a very clear and simple roadmap to resolve the issues of Kirkuk. It's Article 140 of the Constitution. It's broken up into 3 very logical steps. Normalization of Kirkuk, i.e. addressing the property claims commissions, who's entitled to live there, who was brought in illegally, who was forced out. The second is to have a census on what is the demographics once you've addressed the normalization. And the third thing is to have a referendum in Kirkuk to talk about the future of Kirkuk, its future status within Iraq, within Kurdistan, as a separate entity, whatever the questions may be. It's a 3-step outline that is quite clear. The UN are heavily involved in trying to create this dialogue now. And I feel that, you know, the noise and the dust storms around the post-referendum issues are beginning to settle, and the major Kurdish parties are realizing that this is bigger than party politics. This is Kirkuk. This is something that has been, thousands of Kurds have died over Kirkuk, so there is an emotional attachment to Kirkuk, and so long as this issue isn't addressed, then it's going to impact politics, it's going to impact the economy, it's going to impact security, and it's a key issue to address it. Our relations with Iran is a country with enormous influence in the region, enormous influence in Iraq. It's a country that does a lot of business with Kurdistan, a country that has a lot of vested political and economic and security interests in Iraq, as well as in Kurdistan. But you know, we're not an island. We have Iran on one side, we have Turkey on the other. We used to have a country called Syria. I hope that it will return one day and be a country that can be our border. But I'll summarize your question with an anecdote that should be clear in the answer. Once my father was at the State Department in Washington, meeting with some senior US diplomats, and they were asking him these questions. So what are the Iranians doing? And my father said, well, Mr. Ambassador, you know, our Iranian brothers are saying this, but you, as our American friends, are saying that. Well, what about the Turks? What are the Turks doing? He said, well, you know, our Turkish brothers, have been saying this and doing this, but you know, our British friends on the other side are not involved in the way that they should be. And the American diplomat got very annoyed. He said, Jalal, what is this? Is this what it's become? He said, what? He said, the Iranians and the Turks are your brothers, and we and the Brits are your friends? He said, yes. He said, because a brother is imposed on you. A friend is somebody you choose. Thank you. I believe the Lebanese might have some similar issues.
We do.
Brothers, friends, cousins.
You've been portraying our situation, all of your discussion. Hassan Halawi, I would like to ask you about moving forward. Where is the future of Kurdistan? I was there, or we were going there plenty before 2013-14. There was a vision for Kurdistan. Now, talking about things that won't change, borders, neighbors, and things that can change, e-governance, at kind of administration. What is the vision moving forward? Where are we going? What is what sort of economy are we looking for? How are we portraying, or how are you portraying or marketing for Kurdistan? Back then, there was a hope or a dream of having it like a local Dubai. We know now it's not that feasible. But what is feasible? What are we going to? What is the plan forward?
I'm optimistic about the way forward for several reasons. One, Kurdistan grew exponentially from 2005 to around 2011-12. It just boomed, right? It just, the other Iraq. We had this campaign called the other Iraq. Used to upset the other Iraqis, but it was a good campaign. And it portrayed an Iraq that people just were not used to hearing in the media, somewhere safe, somewhere business-friendly, with a good investment law. And investors came flooding in, and it boomed. But in hindsight, it was an unhealthy boom. It was too fast, without some structure, without a real foundation, without the governance side to protect it, without the legal and regulatory side to protect it. So the first strain to this bubble, it popped. Right? ISIS comes, investors leave, oil prices plummet, projects stop, political turmoil expands, the rest of the business community stops. Suddenly, the boom town, the excitement, the next Dubai, the other Iraq, just became like the other Iraq. Right? So we started the reforms. We started changing what we did first, internally. Look inwards, be retrospect, look at ourselves, what's wrong with our system? Why does it take 30 days to set up a business? Why? Why does the Chamber of Commerce have such authority in granting a name for a business to set up? Why are the syndicates of this, that, and the other associations so powerful in the system? Why, looking at what limits, what are the bottlenecks to growth, economic growth, societal growth, and this period where we haven't had money, where ministers haven't been busy cutting ribbons and laying foundation stones for projects, has really helped us institutionally look inwards and look at what do states, countries, sub-sovereigns, what do they need to have as pillars to govern effectively? And that, now that I'm sensing an uptick in the economy, there's money coming in, oil prices have stabilized a little bit, we're paying off our debts a bit, we have a bit more money, projects are turning on, investors are slightly coming back. I expect a much more sensible growth over the next 10 years. There'll be little dips here and there, there'll be some peaks, but I expect the growth to be subtle, and that's healthier for us. That's more sustainable for us. And the way to do that is to, first of all, streamline government services, but also take the government out of certain sectors. Get out of the certain sectors. We don't do certain things well. What we don't do well, we should pull out. And the private sector can do better. And we've got to not fear the private sector. And the private sector is not all corrupt. The private sector is not evil. The private sector is the other side of the public sector. They're part of the society. They're just as patriotic as government employees, if not more. So we need to support the private sector, to have the regulations in place, to support them, to not be jealous of them, let them make money, because I always say a company that makes 10 times more money in Kurdistan than they used to will be 10 times more productive than they used to be, will hire 10 times the people that they used to hire, will make 10 times the profit that they used to make, which means I can tax them 10 times the amount that I used to tax them. And it's win-win. And they do a service that I can't as a government, because I'm bureaucrats and I have routine and I have all of these things that just stop me from doing something effectively. And there is something about the public and the private sector which is different from the public and the government. Look at the cell phone sector, cell phones. Everyone has a cell phone. We have about 90% cell phone and internet penetration rate in Kurdistan, which is pretty good given how rural some parts of Kurdistan is. And guess what? If you don't pay your cell phone bill, guess what happens? Power gets cut off. If you don't pay your electricity bill, guess what happens? Nothing. you keep getting electricity. Okay, I don't want to cut people's electricity, but you know what? When somebody pays for something, they'll respect it more. If somebody's paying for electricity, they're not going to waste it. If somebody's going to pay for water, they're not going to leave the water hose running after they've washed their car for 4 hours, because it's a cost. And that part of this is public awareness. Part of it is as a government understanding our limitations and being truthful with ourselves and our public to say, we can't do this, but somebody else can do it better than us. Let's give them that role, and if they can make money out of it, good, fair play to them. Ideologically, it's difficult because we still have, it's odd. Iraq is odd because it's still very leftist. Despite the fact that there are Islamic parties in power, Shiite Islamic parties in power in Baghdad, most of the powerful parties in Iraq have some sort of Islamic identity. They all have politburos. Right. There is still a very remnants of a socialist mindset in Iraq, despite the current political structures. And culturally, we just need to adapt to the notion that the government cannot do everything itself. And it's more difficult than cutting a regulation here, because this is talking about changing the mindset. And that could be a generational issue. As the younger generation come into the government, they may have less memories of Che Guevara and some of the old revolutionaries. Right? They may look more towards...
Is it just leftist, or is it because it's easier? It's easier to promise people don't pay bills, easier, it gets you more votes, it gets you more quickly.
It's all of the above. Look, for example, I'll make a confession. In the days when we had a functioning fiscal relationship with Baghdad, Baghdad used to give KRG its budget and then cut off what it thought was our internal revenues, customs, tax, electricity, whatever. They would do like a calculation and cut it back. So what we did was we encouraged our citizens, don't pay tax. It'll only go to Baghdad, don't worry about it. Short-sighted, made our population very happy. Nobody paid tax. Baghdad didn't cut, they cut less from our budget because nobody paid tax. And then suddenly we're talking about an independent economy, and oil prices tanked from $140 a barrel to $27 a barrel. I can really do with that tax revenue now. Sorry guys, can you start paying tax again? But you've told me for the last 10 years that I don't need to pay tax. No, but now you need to pay. It was a shock. It was a culture shock. So some of it is just poor planning, poor government activities. Some of it is messaging. Citizens are okay paying private generators for electricity 25 cents a kilowatt. But they're not willing to pay the government public sector electricity at 3 cents a kilowatt. So you know what? Fine, take that 3 cents, put it on to the private generator. Let the private generate it and let them deal with the aftermath. Some of it is, in other countries, political parties have policies, have ideologies. Right? You're left, you're right, you're conservative, you're liberal, you're green, you believe in big government, you believe in small, you believe in private sector, you believe in state-run. There isn't that in Iraq. I'm not sure what it's like in Lebanon. Policies don't exist. It's all politics. People ask me, what is the difference between KDP and PUK? On policy level, I asked the ministers in the former cabinet, Minister for X, he was a member of the KDP, I said, what is your party's policy on your ministry? He said, they don't have one. So this is what's missing in Iraq. There aren't policies. So we migrate, right, between dictatorship and democracy. We're kind of bouncing. It's not set, right? Some days we lean towards democracy, we behave very democratically, we believe in freedom of speech and freedom of expression and freedom of assembly, and you can demonstrate, you can burn off, you can just do whatever you want. It's fine, it's freedom. And some days we're very, very autocratic, very hardline. It's not consistent. Some days we have a very free market economy, complete open competition, go at it. Other days, we wake up and we tell farmers, I want 10,000 kilos of tomatoes from you, 15,000 kilos of cucumbers from you, and I'm telling them specific numbers of fruits and vegetables that I want them to grow, despite what the market is telling me that we don't need tomatoes and cucumbers. So we're oscillating between the state-run and socialist-run. And so we've created this hybrid system that if any of you are political scientists, in 10 years' time you can try to study this and try to make heads or tails of it as this strange hybrid system. We need to sit down with the political parties and say, what do you believe in? What is your economic policy? What is your healthcare policy? What is your education policy? And then we in the government can implement it. But right now that's not the case. The politics is for power, from north to south. It's about who has more seats, who has more ministers, who has more DGs, who has more directors, who can assign more people to more positions so they can ... I'll leave you all to fill in the blanks.
Okay, I think we're out of time, sorry. Thank you very much for being here, and it was very,
Thank you.
very great
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.